Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are watching and listening to Historian Radio's Echoes of the News, and I am Muhammad Hussain Qazi, and these are today's headlines from the past. On this day, the 23rd of October, 1642, the Cavaliers of Charles I clashed with Cromwell's parliamentary Roundheads at the Battle of Edgehill in the Cotswolds, the first major but inconclusive encounter between these two forces in the history of the English Civil War. And continuing on this very day, in 1812, a rumor that Napoleon had died in Russia encouraged an anti-Napoleonic faction in Paris to try and mount a coup d'etat. When the news reached Napoleon, he expedited his retreat back to France, and ahead of his retreating at the Grande Armée. This would be one of the first moments in the history of Napoleonic rule where Napoleon's rule would be questioned in this form. Moving forwards, in 1922, the shortest term of office this century in the 20th century, of a British Prime Minister began this day when Andrew Bonar Law took office. Due to ill health, he was replaced 6 months later on the 22nd of May 1923 by Stanley Baldwin. So he would last a total of a year in office. This would be the shortest term a British Prime Minister has ever served the office of Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And moving forwards, in 1954, the United Kingdom of Britain, the United States, and France, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics agreed to end the occupation of Germany, leading to the formation of West and East Germany. Subsequently, both West and East Germany were allowed to join their respective defense blocs. That would be to say that West Germany was allowed to join NATO, and soon after East Germany, or the German Democratic Republic, was allowed to join the Warsaw Pact, which was the Soviet version of NATO. And continuing on the topic of heated Cold War affairs, in 1956, the Hungarian revolt against the Soviet leadership began. Thousands of demonstrators called for the withdrawal of the Soviet armed forces from Hungary. This would be one of the most well-documented uprisings to take place behind the Iron Curtain. And continuing on this very day, in 1987, dolphins were first used by the US Navy in the Gulf War to help detect mines. An interesting moment in the history of espionage behind enemy lines. And on that intriguing note, we now move on to the next segment of our show, where we recount the famous births and deaths of famous figures from the history of the 19th and 20th centuries and sometimes earlier. Born on this day in 1940 was famous footballer Pelé. Pelé is a very well-known figure to have lived in the history of football or soccer, depending on where you are watching from, and has definitely secured his name in the Hall of Fame for footballers or soccer players. And unfortunately, on this day in 42 BC, Marcus Junius Brutus was overthrown and he would pass away. On this day, the 23rd of October, 42 BC. Marcus Junius Brutus is remembered as the closest confidant of Julius Caesar and one of the central figures in the plot to murder, the successful plot to assassinate and murder Julius Caesar, and is best remembered in the Shakespearean dialogue uttered in the play titled Julius Caesar by the role of Julius Caesar himself, when he says in his dying breath, "Et tu, Brute." And on that note, we conclude today's headlines of the day. You were watching and listening to Historian Radio's Echoes of the News, and I am Muhammad Hussain Qazi. And these were today's headlines as history first heard them. Good night.